Thank my colleagues across the way to actually come together today and try and do something to help the nation advance. And with that, I encourage everyone to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from South Carolina yields back, and the gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. For what purposes does the gentleman from Puerto Rico rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers. I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time.
I yield back.
The gentleman from Puerto Rico yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time as well.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3534 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2621 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 331, H.R. 2621, a bill to establish the Chimney Rock National Monument in the state of Colorado and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Heinrich, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, and I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
With that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield such time as you may consume to the sponsor of this bill, the gentleman from Colorado who has done such great work to move this potential issue forward, Mr. Tipton.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, this past weekend had the opportunity to be in a truly remarkable part of the United States in southwestern Colorado, an area called Chimney Rock, an area renowned for its cultural heritage and its important archaeological traits. Chimney Rock is considered by the historic preservation community and the archaeological community to be one of the most significant archaeological sites in the western United States. Centuries ago, hundreds of early Native Americans called the area home. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient farming areas, homes, and other structures, indicating that this was a major cultural center for these early Americans. The ancestors of modern Pueblo Indians made a journey to the northernmost outpost of the Chacoan civilization to witness a rare lunar occurrence that they held to be sacred. Chimney Rock is only one of 3 sites like this in the entire world. Despite the scarcity of this gem, the Chimney Rock site of the San Juan National Forest is yet to be able to receive a designation worthy of its historical and cultural significance. The area is currently under the management of the U.S. Forest Service and is covered under the USFS Organic Act, which has no provision to be able to address preservation and the management of such a historic and culturally significant area as Chimney Rock. H.R. 2621, the Chimney Rock National Monument Establishment Act, requires no additional federal funds and therefore no increase in spending. It ensures a continued access to the area so that local ranchers will be able to utilize the lands that they depend on for grazing, for outdoorsmen to be able to continue to take advantage of the game opportunities in the area, and for members of the Indian tribes to be able to continue the use of chimney rock for traditional ceremonies. The bill also allows for continued archaeological research and exploration in the area. In addition to preserving and protecting the site's historical and cultural treasures, the National Monument designation will give Chimney Rock the prestige and protection it deserves, and to elevate it to a status that will increase its exposure to the region and to be able to generate tourism, creating a potential economic boost for the surrounding communities and generating jobs. Without any new spending, making Chimney Rock a national monument would create a win-win situation for this remarkable place, for the local communities, the state of Colorado, Native Indian tribes, and future generations of Americans. Mr. Chairman, it's my pleasure to be able to sponsor H.R. 2621, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back, and the gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico rise?
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield myself such time as I may consume, Mr.
The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
I want to applaud the majority for bringing this strong conservation legislation to the House floor today to designate a national monument in Congressman Tipton's district. There are a number of bills, like Congressman Tipton's, waiting for action that would either designate a new national monument or provide designation of a new wilderness area. This includes a bill that I've sponsored to include new areas into the existing Manzano Mountains Wilderness Area. Congratulations to Congressman Tipton for his success in advancing local conservation efforts. I hope that this is the beginning of consideration of similar bills pending before the committee so that we can advance our conservation goals across the nation. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Mexico reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
I'd like to ask the gentleman from New Mexico if he has other speakers.
I do not.
Then I'm prepared to close if you are.
I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Mexico yields back. The gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Then in closing, may I just say that I want to commend the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, for taking the time and the effort to put forth a well-thought-out, a locally supported piece of legislation that designates an area of special significance in the district that he happens to represent. This legislation is an example of the way this type of designation should be done, as opposed to by administrative fiat under things like the Antiquities Act. I urge the adoption of this measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Utah yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2621 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Utah. Oh, New Mexico, pardon me.
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 and the Chair's prior announcement, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed.
Which one?
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2745 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2745, a bill to amend the Mesquite Lands Act of 1986 to facilitate implementation of a multi-species habitat conservation plan for the Virgin River in Clark County, Nevada.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Heinrich, will each control 20 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
And with that, Mr. Speaker, since this is a significant bill that makes a change that has been long overdue, I'd like to yield as much time as he may consume to the sponsor of this bill, the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Heck.
Gentleman from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 2745, legislation amending the Mesquite Lands Act of 1986. The original Mesquite Lands Act provided the City of Mesquite, Nevada, the exclusive right to purchase at fair market value certain federal land under the control of the Bureau of Land Management. As the city is landlocked by public lands and was the fastest-growing city in the country for much of the 1990s, this legislation was amended in 1996 to allow the city to purchase additional federal lands to ensure the city of Mesquite could continue to grow and prosper. In 1999, Congress passed the latest Mesquite Lands Act amendment with the specific purpose of providing land to construct a commercial airport and to provide more room for commercial and industrial development to again meet future demands for a rapidly growing tourism industry. In 2002, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issued a Mesquite Lands Act biological opinion which promulgated certain terms and conditions associated with the land sale. A key term contained in the opinion is a mandate that the city participate in the development and implementation of a habitat conservation and recovery plan and a hydrologic monitoring and mitigation plan along the Virgin River. In response to this opinion, Congress made a technical amendment to the Act within the Clark County Conservation of Public Land and Natural Resources Act of 2002 that set aside a portion of the proceeds from the sale of each parcel for the development of the recovery plan and the hydrologic monitoring and mitigation plan. It is apparent that during the process, language allowing for the implementation of these plans was inadvertently omitted from this amendment. Other land acts, such as the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act and the Lincoln and White Pine County Lands Acts, clearly state that funds shall be expended on development and implementation of multi-species habitat conservation plans. I believe that the same process should be applied to the Mesquite Lands Act. H.R. 2745 is a legislative clarification regarding the special funds allowing for both the development and implementation of the Conservation and Recovery Plan and the Monitoring and Mitigation Plan. This is consistent with other plans in Nevada, and the same process should be applied to the city of Mesquite. In addition to the clarification for the Conservation and Recovery Plan, there is an issue regarding the timing of the land sales identified in the 1909 amendment, and this is also addressed in H.R. 2745. The legislation originally gave the city of Mesquite 12 years to purchase the land from the date of enactment. However, due to severe economic conditions that continue to plague southern Nevada, along with the delay of the environmental impact statement for the airport site, the city is not in a position to purchase the final sections of property at this time, and therefore was not able to make this deadline. H.R. 2745 provides for an extension of an additional 8 years to allow economic conditions to improve. In closing, I would again like to thank Chairman Bishop and Ranking Member Grijalva, as well as the National Resources Committee staff, for working with me on moving this legislation forward. H.R. 2745 will allow the city of Mesquite to continue to control the path of its future expansion and economic development, as well as correct an oversight in prior legislation. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Nevada yields back. The gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this legislation allows the city of Mesquite, Nevada to continue acquiring certain lands from the federal government for its commercial airport. Under the original 1986 legislation, some receipts from the sale of federal lands would be retained to fund habitat improvements along the Virgin River within Clark County. As amended, H.R. 2745 directs the proceeds from the land sales to the Treasury, thus leaving the habitat work unfunded. While the conservation work is important and deserves funding, we do not object to this legislation, and, Mr. Speaker, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Mexico reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
To reserve.
Gentleman reserves.
I yield back.
Gentleman from New Mexico yields back. The gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, authored by Congressman Heck, H.R. 2745 was amended by the Natural Resources Committee and is further amended today to ensure that there is no cost to the taxpayer. And this will treat all proceeds from the land sales uniformly and again at no cost to the taxpayer. So I urge the adoption of this measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2745 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds.
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present. Make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 and the Chair's prior announcement, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3874 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 333, H.R. 3874, a bill to provide for the conveyance of 8 cemeteries that are located on National Forest System land in Black Hills National Forest, South Dakota.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Heinrich, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
I again ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to explain this common sense bill as well, I'd like the sponsor, who has worked so hard and done such a great job on it, Ms. Noem of South Dakota, to have as much time as she may consume.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. Today I rise in support of my legislation, H.R. 3874, the Black Hills Cemetery Act. This bill is of great importance to many communities in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The Black Hills is home to a number of historic communities and cemeteries. Many of these originated in old mining towns in the 1800s. They have unique significance to the surrounding communities. These include the Englewood Cemetery, the Galena Cemetery, Haywood Cemetery, Mountain Meadows Cemetery, the Robe Cemetery, Nemo Cemetery, Rockerville Cemetery, the Silver City Cemetery, and also the Cold Springs Cemetery. These cemeteries are currently being managed by local associations or community groups in the surrounding areas, but have been technically owned by the U.S. Forest Service since the 1900s. This causes unnecessary liability for the U.S. Forest Service because of the responsibility for upkeep and dealing with possible vandalism or damage to the property. The Black Hills Cemetery Act would simply transfer ownership of these cemeteries and up to 2 acres of adjacent land to the caretaking communities that have managed them for generations under special use permits issued by the Forest Service at almost no cost to taxpayers. It also makes clear that these cemeteries will continue to be used for the same purpose as they have always been used in the past. I sponsored this bill at the request of these communities and the current caretakers of the cemeteries and in consultation with the U.S. Forest Service. An article by the Rapid City Journal talked about Dennis McMillan, who is chief of the local volunteer fire department that takes care of the Hayward Cemetery. He mentioned that passing this bill would make it less complicated for both the caretakers and for the United States Forest Service. He also mentioned that this bill is important because it allows for some expansion for those families who are still interested in burial plots. A lot of local residents have relatives buried in these cemeteries. So this coming Memorial Day, many will pay their respects to their family members that are there. Many of these communities will hold special services on the cemetery grounds in the coming weeks. After the House passes this bill, these families and communities are one step closer to having these cemeteries officially in their care and will continue to do an excellent job managing them. I'd like to thank the communities and the local residents for their help in working with my office and for advocating for this bill. I'd also like to thank Chairman Hastings and Bishop for their staff for also helping me push this bill forward. It is important for those reasons that we pass this bill and that the Senate does the same. These communities have been asking for a solution to this situation for a number of years, and as their representative, I'm glad that we have the opportunity to pass this bill today off the House floor. I urge my colleagues to support and pass this bill for the communities in South Dakota. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from South Dakota yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 3874 conveys cemeteries currently on Forest Service lands to communities in South Dakota. These local communities already manage and maintain these cemeteries, and the legislation requires that these lands continue to be used for cemetery purposes. We have no objections to this legislation, and with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Mexico reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Utah.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time.
I yield back.
Gentleman from New Mexico yields back. The gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Thank you. Once again, this common sense piece of legislation moves 9 parcels of lands to the respective communities that currently manage and maintain these cemeteries. It frees the Forest Service from administering these cemeteries so they can focus on other jobs like maybe tackling the growing mountain pine beetle epidemic in the Black Hills. It's a great bill. I urge its adoption, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3874 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. Gentleman from Utah.
On that, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Oops. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 205 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 294, H.R. 205, a bill to amend the Act titled, An Act to Authorize the Leasing of Restricted Indian Lands for Public, Religious, Educational, Recreational, Residential, Business, and Other Purposes, requiring the grant of long-term leases, approved August 9, 1955, to provide for Indian tribes to enter into certain leases without prior express approval from the Secretary of the Interior.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Heinrich, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
And, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Under current law, each and every non-mineral lease that a tribe executes with a third party is subject to approval by the Department of Interior before it can take effect. It doesn't matter whether the tribe and a third party have negotiated the terms of a lease to their mutual satisfaction. Washington, D.C. ultimately decides because, after all, Washington, D.C. always knows better. Unfortunately, the result of this paternalism is predictable. The leases do not get approved on a timely basis, if at all. The government has erected all kinds of regulatory hurdles for tribes leasing their land in the private sector, and time is money. And when the government delays the cost money, investors take their business elsewhere. In 2000, Congress agreed with a request by the Navajo Nation to let the tribe lease its land without federal approval so long as the leasing occurs under tribal regulations and they have been approved by the Secretary. The amendment absolves taxpayers from liability for leasing decisions the Navajo Nation makes. For years, many tribes have pleaded with Congress to let them manage their lands with less federal supervision. H.R. 205 simply allows any tribe the same option that the Navajo Nation already enjoys. While this bill does not completely remove the government from tribal lands, which would be our goal, it takes a step in the right direction. A previous version of this bill was introduced and ordered reported in the very last Congress, but it languished and saw no further action. So I'm very pleased today that this bill, sponsored by a Democrat member that decreases federal regulation of Indian lands, is poised to pass with a very strong bipartisan support. I urge adoption of this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from New Mexico.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, shortly after being elected to Congress, I met with some New Mexico tribal leaders who brought to my attention the onerous process for securing a long-term lease on trust land, an unnecessary procedural burden that affects every single home mortgage on Indian land. We all know how important home ownership is to healthy communities, and the last thing the federal government should do is stand in the way of families ready and willing to buy a home. That's why I introduced this bill, the Helping Expedite and Advance Responsible Tribal Home Ownership Act, which we call the HEARTH Act. Native families buying a house go through the same process as everyone else. They find a house they like, work with their bank to gain approval for a mortgage, and make an offer to the seller. But before these families can close on the sale, they must also get approval from the Bureau of Indian Affairs to lease the land that the house is built on. That approval can take between 6 months and 2 years, an intolerable delay for most buyers. We all know that a seller is rarely able to wait 2 years to sell their house, and banks are often unable to hold a mortgage approval for anywhere near that long. I know that there are many Native families who would prefer to stay and raise their children in the communities where their families have lived for generations, but instead have had to move from Indian country to nearby cities because they want to own a home. Families shouldn't be forced to make such an important decision based on how many months or years it will take a federal bureaucracy to approve a mortgage on tribal land. Similarly, many tribal communities lose out on commercial investment because the process for securing a lease through the BIA takes so long. In these tough economic times, we should not be making it harder for business to develop on tribal land. The HEARTH Act would allow tribes to develop their own leasing regulations and make leasing decisions on the tribal level rather than waiting for BIA approval. Under the bill, tribes would submit their regulations to the Secretary of Interior for approval. Once the regulations are approved, tribes would be authorized to make their own decisions about how to lease their land in accordance with approved leases. This process would be completely voluntary for tribes. A tribe that chooses not to submit leasing regulations for approval would continue under the current system of BIA approval. Many tribes already have a lease approval process through their tribal government that approves land leases before they're even sent to the BIA. For those tribes that want the authority and the responsibility for making final leasing decisions at the tribal level, the HEARTH Act would give them the option of doing so. Our nation is home to a vast diversity of tribes, and federal policy should reflect that diversity. The HEARTH Act will allow tribes to exercise greater control over their own lands, support self-determination, and eliminates bureaucratic delays that stand in the way of home ownership and economic development in tribal communities. Mr. Speaker, before I close, I want to make sure to thank Representatives Markey, Hastings, Boren, Young, Kildee, Cole, and Lujan for their meaningful work on this important legislation. And again, I ask my colleagues to vote yes on this important bipartisan bill to support Native families and communities, and I'd reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Mexico reserves the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Oklahoma who has proven an expert as well as totally versed on the issues of Native Americans in the United States, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him for those exceptionally generous comments. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 205, the HEARTH Act, by Mr. Heinrich, the gentleman from New Mexico, and I want to commend him for bringing forward and working so hard to secure the passage of this genuinely important piece of legislation. Increased opportunity for economic development in Indian country is the best way to raise the standards of living for tribal members. This legislation will help break down the barriers to economic development by making needed reforms to tribal leasing regulations. H.R. 205 will streamline the existing bureaucratic process for leasing tribal trust lands by providing Indian tribes with the option to develop and manage their own surface leasing regimes. Existing law requires that each lease of tribal surface lands be approved by the Secretary of the Interior. The secretarial approval process is costly, time-consuming, often results in lost business and economic opportunities for tribal communities, and far too cumbersome to be helpful to those it's designed to protect. These lease reforms come from a pilot program which implemented this same regime on the Navajo Reservation over a decade ago. Based on the success of that pilot, it's only natural that these reforms be available to all tribes. Under H.R. 205, once a tribe's own surface regime is approved by the Department of the Interior, the tribe can proceed to negotiate, approve, and administer leases of tribal trust lands under its control. Passage of H.R. 205 will enable tribal governments to assume responsibility for the management of their lands, reduce federal costs and government liability, and encourage more housing and economic development on Indian lands, resulting ultimately in job creation. This bill has strong bipartisan support, is a priority for Indian country, and is strongly supported by the administration. It empowers tribes, encourages tribal self-government, decreases the dependency of tribes on the federal government, and speeds up economic development in Indian country. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of H.R. 205, the HEARTH Act. Again, I want to commend the gentleman from New Mexico for his hard work on this important legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Oklahoma yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico rise?
Mr. Speaker, I would yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from American Samoa.
Gentleman from American Samoa is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
I could not help but listen with tremendous interest, and also to commend my good friend from Oklahoma, who also is the co-chairman of our Native American Congressional Caucus, and I fully associate myself with the eloquent remarks that he has made in addressing the needs of this legislation that needs to be passed. And I also want to commend my good friend from Utah and the gentleman from New Mexico for their management of this piece of legislation that is so important to our Native American community. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Mexico
I yield back the balance of my time.
yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Utah is recognized.
I urge adoption of this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 205 as amended? Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules.
Speaker,
Gentleman from Utah.
on that I also ask for the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4240 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4240, a bill to reauthorize the North Korean Human Rights Act of 2004 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross-Lehtinen, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend and to submit extraneous materials for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
I appreciate it. I rise in support of H.R. 4240, the Ambassador James R. Lilley and Congressman Stephen J. Solarz North Korea Human Rights Reauthorization Act of 2012. I'd like to thank my co-author and ranking member, my good friend Mr. Berman, and the dozens of bipartisan co-sponsors who have joined us to continue the important human rights work that Congress began 9 years ago. The North Korean regime remains one of the world's worst human rights abusers, as the legacy of tyranny has been passed on to a new generation. South Korea's National Human Rights Commission detailed in a 380-page report released earlier this month that Kim Jong-un maintains the same hellish gulag as his father and grandfather before him. Hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children are forced into slave labor, starved and tortured to death in isolated camps. Even outside the camps, the North Korean people enjoy no freedoms of speech, religion, press, or assembly. Officials crush any dissent and have reportedly authorized the on-the-spot execution of those attempting to flee the country. A regime that maims its own people with impunity cannot be trusted to keep its agreements with foreigners. Thus, solving the North Korean human rights issue is also an integral part of addressing the North Korean security threat. North Korean women and girls are brutalized and trafficked in China, where they are sold into forced marriage and sexual slavery. And China, which sits on the executive board of the UN's refugee protection body, continues to forcibly repatriate North Koreans into danger. H.R. 4240, Mr. Speaker, will continue the important bipartisan work of the North Korean Human Rights Act by extending until the year 2017 its authorities to promote human rights, refugee protection, and freedom of information for the people of North Korea. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of H.R. 4240.
ask unanimous consent that my statement be included in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And yield for a statement on this bill to my friend and colleague from American Samoa, the ranking member of the Asia and Pacific Subcommittee.
Gentleman from American Samoa is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Unanimous consent to include the full text of my statement to be made part of the record.
Without objection, so
And I
ordered.
want to commend my good friend, the chairwoman of our Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as our ranking member, Mr. Berman, for bringing this legislation. And I am in full support, and I do associate myself with the comments and the statements made earlier by our great chairman, and as well as our ranking member, Mr. Berman. And I urge my colleagues to support this piece of legislation, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time.
I have no further request for time, and I'm prepared to yield back if the gentleman would yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, no further speakers. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields back.
Thank you,
Gentlewoman
Mr.
from
Speaker.
Florida.
I have no further request for time, and I also yield back.
Gentlewoman from Florida yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4240 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the House suspend the rules and pass House Resolution 568 as amended.
Does the gentlewoman move that the House suspend the rules?
Yes, sir, I do.
Clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 568, resolution expressing the sense of the House of Representatives regarding the importance of preventing the government of Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapons capability.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross-Leighton, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend and to submit extraneous materials for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank the gentleman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of House Resolution 568, which I introduced together with the distinguished ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from California, my friend Mr. Berman. The Iranian regime continues to pose an immediate and growing threat to the United States, to our allies, and to the Iranian people. In fact, just over the weekend, it was reported that the IAEA discovered a drawing that shows an explosive containment chamber of the type needed for nuclear arms-related tests. This was based on information from inside an Iranian military base. Iran remains the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, aiding multiple groups, including Hezbollah and Hamas, which continue to destabilize the Middle East and which are responsible for the deaths of Americans. It was only a few months ago that U.S. officials foiled a planned attack on U.S. soil that was commissioned by the Iranian regime, and the Iranian regime is believed to have been behind the attacks against Israeli embassies that took place earlier this year. I have much more to say, Mr. Speaker, but at this time I will reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman from Florida reserves the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.Res. 568, expressing the sense of the House of Representatives regarding the importance of preventing the government of Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapons capability, and yield myself 3 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this resolution is extremely timely, as next week the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany will once again sit down with Iran to negotiate cessation of Iran's nuclear weapons program. What better time for this body to send an unambiguous message that Iran must never be allowed to achieve a nuclear weapons capability, and that its nuclear weapons program must end once and for all. That's exactly what this resolution does. The United States must continue to take the lead in preventing Iran from obtaining the capability to build a nuclear weapon. If Iran were to achieve that capability, neighbors like Saudi Arabia and Egypt would want that capability as well. Others in the region would begin to defer to Iran as if it already were a nuclear power. And worst of all, once Iran acquires the capability, it would be able to build an actual nuclear weapon so quickly that we may not be able to stop it. Stopping Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapons capability is not simply an American priority, but a global responsibility. And I want to be straightforward about my view. A regime that brutalizes its own people, trains, arms, and dispatches terrorist proxies, props up the repugnant Assad dictatorship, denies the Holocaust, and incites violence against and kills Americans should never be allowed to reach the nuclear threshold. The urgent nature of the Iranian nuclear threat demands that the United States work with our allies to do everything possible, diplomatically, politically, and economically, to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapons capability. No option, as the President has said, can be taken off the table. Mr. Speaker, the policy of preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapons capability is not unfamiliar to the House of Representatives. Since 2009, we have passed 5 bills expressing congressional support for this policy. These bills have been supported by nearly every member of the House. The resolution before us today reminds us, as well as the world, how Iran has flaunted its flagrant disregard for UN Security Council resolutions, is an active state sponsor of terrorism, has engaged in serious human rights abuses against its own citizens, and plotted a heinous terrorist attack on American soil. This resolution also reminds us of the urgency as well as the seriousness of the nuclear issue. And so, as the window is closing, we send a clear message that the House is aligned with the administration in thoroughly rejecting containment, a policy that would have us sit back and watch Iran get the bomb, then try to contain it as we contained the Soviet Union. In fact, we have no choice. I yield myself an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
In fact, we have no choice but to stop Iran's nuclear weapons program before it ever reaches that point. Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues to support this important resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we know, Iran continues to sponsor violent extremist groups in Iraq and Afghanistan that have killed our men and women in uniform. With a nuclear weapons capability, the regime would dramatically increase its ability to strengthen the United States and our allies. We are running out of time to stop the nightmare of a nuclear weapons-capable Iran from becoming a reality. Estimates from the U.S. and Israeli officials indicate that Iran could develop nuclear weapons in less than 1 year. And even before the regime actually develops nuclear weapons, Iran may enter into what Israeli Defense Minister calls a zone of immunity. And after that point, we would have very few options left to actually stop Iran from going nuclear. And right now, the regime is doing all it can to run down the clock and enter that zone of immunity. The most recent set of negotiations are just another way for Iran to hold off Western sanctions and buy more time to further their capabilities. We need to stop the regime before it possesses the capability to develop nuclear weapons, not before it makes a decision to develop nuclear weapons, because we may not know that they have actually made that decision until it is too late. And once that regime enters into the zone of immunity, it can decide at any time to develop nuclear weapons, and we would probably not be able to stop them. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman from Florida reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the Minority Whip, my friend from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from California has been a leader on this issue, as has the chair of the committee, Eliana Ross-Layton. Representative Burton has been a leader in Congress when it comes to reminding us how important it is to prevent the rise in nuclear war and nuclear-armed Iran. And we are fortunate as a country to have a partnership between the chair and the ranking member focused like a laser on this issue. So I thank my friend Mr. Berman and my friend Ileana Ross-Lehtinen. Mr. Berman has been instrumental in securing funding for the employment of the Iron Dome anti-missile system to counter the threat from Iranian-supplied short-range rockets in the hands of terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. I rise in strong support of the Chair and Ranking Member's resolution, and I am proud to be a co-sponsor with them of the resolution. The most significant threat to peace, regional security, and American interests in the Middle East is Iran's nuclear program. This resolution makes clear that it is in America's security interest not to contain a nuclear Iran, but to prevent one. A nuclear Iran would destabilize an already volatile region where so many American troops are stationed and one so vital to the world's energy supplies. Iran continues to be a sponsor of groups committed to destruction of our ally Israel and that threaten Americans throughout the world. Iran is believed to be pursuing not only a nuclear capability, but also delivery technologies that could threaten our allies in Europe and the Middle East, as well as American assets in the region. Thankfully, the Obama administration has taken a strong lead in confronting Iran. President Obama has built a wide coalition of support that has imposed the strongest sanctions Iran has ever faced. May I have 30 additional seconds, Mr. Chair? Mr. Berman?
I yield the gentleman 30 additional
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. In particular, we're hitting the Iranian government where it hurts most, its oil exports and its banking sector. From the very start, his policy has been not containment, but prevention. This resolution reaffirms the administration's prevention policy, and I urge my colleagues to pass it as a strong sign that Iran must not be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. And again, in closing, I want to congratulate the Chair, Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, and the Ranking Member, Howard Berman, on their strong and unwavering leadership on this critically important issue to the national security of the United States of America and international and global security as well. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland yields back. The Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed without amendment H.R. 2072, an act to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank of the United States and for other purposes.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, sir. For the Iranian regime, possession of the capability to produce a nuclear weapon would be almost as useful as actually having one. Tehran would be able to intimidate its neighbors, engage in even more threatening actions by reminding us that they could develop nuclear weapons any time the regime wanted. Tehran might even decide not to reveal whether or not it had developed nuclear weapons, and thereby keeping the world guessing and off balance indefinitely, all while claiming innocence. Tehran would be in the driver's seat, and the security of the United States, Israel, and our many other allies would be in their hands. We need to make clear that containing a nuclear Iran is not an option, that nothing short of stopping Iran from developing nuclear weapons capability is good enough. So that is why Ranking Member Berman and I have introduced the bill before us, House Resolution 568, which strongly supports preventing the Iranian regime from acquiring nuclear weapons capability. It rejects any policy that would rely on efforts to contain a nuclear weapons-capable Iran. It supports the right and democratic aspirations of the Iranian people, and lastly, it urges the President to reaffirm the unacceptability of an Iran with a nuclear weapons capability and oppose any policy that would rely on containment as an option. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman from Florida reserves the balance of her time. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank my friend from California, but unfortunately must disagree with him. This resolution contains broad and dangerous language that would undermine any diplomatic solution regarding Iran's nuclear program. Without explicit language stating there is no authorization for military action, this could be interpreted as a blank check for war. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell's Chief of Staff, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, has stated, quote, "This resolution reads like the same piece of music that got us into the Iraq War," unquote. Did not Congress learn anything from being hustled into a war based on misrepresentations? At a time when the U.S. is engaging in its first successful direct talks with Iran in years, it is more critical than ever for Congress to support these negotiations. Even if language was added to H.Res. 568 to make it absolutely clear that this bill does not constitute an authorization for war, and only Congress can make such an authorization, it still puts members of Congress on record as opposing a diplomatic solution, paving the way toward war with Iran. In the past, Congress has rejected its power to declare war, and now we want to tell the President that he can't declare diplomacy. Congress must reject resolutions that could lead the U.S. into yet another disastrous and costly war and tie the President's hands as he endeavors for a peaceful solution. Have we not lost enough of our brave men and women to causes that are not in the interest of the U.S.? H.Res. 568 lowers the bar for war by changing long-standing U.S. policy that Iran must not acquire nuclear weapons by instead drawing the red line for military action at Iran achieving a nuclear weapons capability. The term capability is undefined in the underlying resolution, and it could be applied to any country with a civilian nuclear program, including Japan and Brazil. This resolution therefore sets a precedent which could cause us to stumble from one war into another. And what? We haven't had enough wars? Not all enrichment is devoted to building bombs. This resolution marks a significant shift in U.S. policy that could threaten critical upcoming negotiations with Iran on May 23rd. It's likely that a negotiated deal to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran would provide for Iranian enrichment for peaceful purposes under the framework of the Non-Proliferation Nuclear Weapons Treaty with strict safeguards and inspections. I want to point out in conclusion that Yuval Dishkin, the former Shin Bet chief, has stated that attacking Iran will encourage them to develop a bomb. Meir Dagan, former Mossad chief, echoed his sentiment by saying, quote, "Attacking Iran is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. It will be followed by a war with Iran. It's the kind of thing where we know how it starts but not know how it will end." Quote, "I think our diplomacy is having an effect," said General Martin Dempsey, current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
I'd like to yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This resolution reaffirms the position of the House with respect to U.S. policy on Iran's nuclear program. Efforts to misrepresent this resolution really distracts from the real problem, which is the increasing threat posed by Iran's nuclear program and the need to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons capability. Tehran has repeatedly lied to the world about its secret nuclear activities. Tehran has violated its international non-proliferation obligations, and it has repeatedly threatened to destroy our ally Israel. Just earlier this year, Ayatollah Khamenei said, "This truly cancerous Israel must be destroyed in the region, and this will, without doubt, come to fruition." Now, it is abundantly clear that Iran cannot be trusted with uranium enrichment or any component of the nuclear program. Even the UN Security Council resolutions have demanded that Iran stop all uranium enrichment and reprocessing. Unless compelled to change course, Iran will soon have all of the basic components or capabilities to produce a nuclear weapon. The only thing that will be left for them to do will be to put the pieces together. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran is expanding its stockpiles of uranium, advancing its missile capabilities, and burying and hiding its nuclear infrastructure. As if that were not enough, the smoking gun in the IAEA's November 2011 report was that Iran carried out, quote, "work on the development of an indigenous design of a nuclear weapon, including the testing of components," end quote. In addition, the IAEA uncovered evidence that Iran was attempting to miniaturize a warhead to fit on top of a ballistic missile. Fast forward to this weekend. Just this weekend, drawings were revealed showing a secret chamber at an Iranian military facility of the type needed for nuclear weapons testing. Again, the regime is building up its capacities on all fronts. And when it has mastered all of these, Tehran would be able to intimidate its neighbors and engage in even more threatening actions, always with the threat that it could flip the switch and produce nuclear weapons at any time. At that point, the U.S. and other responsible nations would have no other option but sit in fear of this nuclear-armed state sponsor of terrorism. We must reaffirm our commitment through adoption of this resolution and stronger sanctions legislation to prevent this doomsday scenario from becoming a reality. With that, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman from Florida reserves the balance of her time. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the delegate from American Samoa, the ranking member of the Asian Pacific Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Fali Mavenga.
Gentleman from American Samoa is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the full text of my statement be made part of the record in support of this resolution.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, it's imperative that the United States and the international community understand that a global capable Iran is a global threat and a danger to the United States, and just as important to the State of Israel, where Iranian leaders have continued to threaten Israel's existence by pledging that Israel must be wiped off the map. This is a direct threat to our closest ally in the Middle East. Iran's reckless attitude continues to be a stimulus for the instability in the Middle East. My greatest fear is that a nuclear-capable Iran will cause other countries in the region to also build their own nuclear program. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I want to associate myself with the eloquent statements made earlier by our good Chairman, Ross Layton, and my good friend, the ranking member, Mr. Berman. With that, I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose? Gentlewoman from Florida reserves the balance of her time. What purpose does the gentleman from California
I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Maryland, Ms. Edwards.
Gentlewoman is recognized for what period of time? 1 minute?
1 minute.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Ranking Member Berman, for yielding the time. And I'd like to engage for the purposes of a colloquy. After reading the resolution and studying it, I just have a couple of questions that I would ask that you clarify and your understanding about the amendment and the resolution, and that is the resolve clauses, especially clauses 4 through 7, are of some concern to me, but I'm interested in hearing from you. Mr. Berman, in your view, does this resolution in any way constitute an authorization for the use of military force?
Her time, absolutely not. This resolution is no way intended, and in no way can it be interpreted as an authorization for the use of military force. It is a non-binding resolution that endorses a diplomatic resolution to the Iranian nuclear program. It includes no operative authorizations regarding the use of force.
And
I don't know if I have more time. If I have more time, I'll recognize you.
Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose is the
I'd like to yield myself
from
such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, sir. Some may put forth the argument that this resolution undermines and threatens the ongoing P5+1 negotiations. Well, the truth is, Mr. Speaker, that the Iranian regime is using these negotiations as a way to buy time and continue enrichment without any additional sanctions. Time and again, the United States has come to the table with Iran, made concession after concession, and left with nothing in return. In one example last month, the Los Angeles Times reported that U.S. officials are now willing to let Iran continue enriching uranium, even though multiple UN Security Council resolutions demand that Iran immediately halt uranium enrichment. And today's New York Times included a report entitled "Iran Sees Success in Stalling on Nuclear Issue." Report states, quote, Iran's negotiation team may be less interested in reaching a comprehensive settlement than in buying time and establishing the legitimacy of its enrichment program, end quote. I couldn't say it better. It's time to stop glorifying negotiations for the sake of negotiations. This resolution strengthens the U.S. position and our leverage. With that, I reserve the balance of our time.
The balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Should we go to? I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, my friend from Florida, Mr. Deutsch.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from California, and I rise today in strong support of House Resolution 568, a resolution making clear that the United States policy towards Iran is not one of containment, but is one of prevention. I'm pleased to have co-introduced this resolution with a bipartisan group of colleagues, including the chair, Ms. Ross-Lehtinen. Indeed, this Congress, this administration, and this President understand that failing to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran would ignite a destabilizing arms race in the Middle East, would threaten the very existence of our ally Israel, and would endanger the security of the American people. As Iran faces growing international isolation, now is not the time to roll back crippling economic sanctions. Nor should we fall victim to this regime's penchant for hiding behind the pretense of negotiations, simply to buy more time. With this resolution, we will send a message to Iran's regime and to the world that the U.S. will accept nothing less than a strict policy of prevention when it comes to this regime's illicit quest for nuclear weapons. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose is the gentleman from Florida?
I'd like to reserve the balance of our time to close on the resolution.